of arms. I'm speaking to you today from Edinburgh, the capital city of Scotland, a city festooned with flags, national, civic, personal. For example, Scottish schools with grants of arms frequently fly their own heraldic flags on special occasions. You see here the arms of Sir William Fettes, the benefactor of Fettes College, and two children launching over the flagpole the banner of the college, which you'll see is derived directly from the shield. You'll also see that health and safety plays no part of private education, as I doubt that in a state school you'd get two teenagers standing on the roof with only a small metal balustrade between them and certain death. I also live in the Port of Leith, and that today flies a flag authorised by the Lord Lion that harks back to its independent borough status, which was only lost in 1920. And the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice in the background Elizabeth Rhodes, formerly Snowdon Herald, who presented the flag to the not district council, the community council. Elizabeth, of course, still the secretary of the Thistle. It's a particular delight that the historic Port of Leith still hosts visiting warships from other countries, and they display not only their national flags, but often distinctive naval ensigns. In August 2023, the frigate Hessen docked here for 3 days and proudly displayed the Bundesrepublik Kriegsmarine Fähnrich, I hope that's well pronounced, and you'll note the swallowtail that we will meet again. Again, in a maritime theme, we see here a red ensign assigned to the Merchant Navy by the Admiralty in 1864, flying from the tower of the oldest working church in Leith, South Leith Parish Church, which was dedicated in 1487, and this they fly on the occasion of its annual Seafarers' Service. However, of particular reference to this presentation is the renowned Royal Mile, the ancient high street of the original town of Edinburgh, running down from a volcanic plug, that is Edinburgh Castle Rock, to the Palace of Holyrood House. This ancient street is decorated with banners, centred largely on those of Scotland's clan chief, but here is a splendid display at the entrance of the castle esplanade of the banner of Edinburgh Castle and the tattoo organisation. Such banners can be personalised by impaling the arms of the individual with that of the office bearer. And here is the banner of the recently retired Governor of Edinburgh Castle, Major General Alistair Bruce of Creunach, CVO, who was the first reservist to be appointed Governor and the first English officer of arms. Here we see him with his distinctive swan-feathered bicorn with Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth. But again, bridging the generations again, we see him on the left as Fitzalan Pursuivant with HM Queen Camilla. In this paper, which is focused on flags, we will be looking mainly at flags used within the clan system. Now, this is not the place for an in-depth academic homily on Picto-Celtic culture, but to understand the development of flags and banners in a clan context, it's necessary to at least touch on a few such esoteric subjects. The word clan is derived from the Celto-Gaelic term for children, and are based on the largely mythological concepts that there was an identifiable, eponymous ancestor whose family formed a growing tribal group or community bound by kinship links. However, there is usually little evidence to be produced to corroborate the colourful origin stories, and entertaining as they are, the lineage of few clans and families can be authenticated until the late 12th and 13th centuries, when, in reality, lay and ecclesiastical warlords, with the assistance of their immediate kindred and followers, were able to dominate indigenous communities who accepted protection and ultimate assimilation, either willingly or by force. Indeed, it is in the 14th century wars of independence that provide a sure foundation for modern clans and families. And here we see a modern reenactor of King Robert the Bruce with the banner of the King of Scots. Now, the mighty Campbell family owed their position not only to strong ties of kinship, but also to acceptance and promotion of the burgeoning central power and authority of the Scottish crown. And it is this royal and feudal component, grounded in an emerging and distinctive Scottish legal system, that tends to separate Scottish clanship from broader tribal groupings. I would, however, draw your attention to this image of the present chief of Clan Campbell, Torquil, the 13th Duke of Argyll. You'll notice that his staff, or cromach, is surmounted by a boar's head, his heraldic crest. I would suggest that the origin of most clan-related flags and banners today is still to be found in forms of totemic symbolism, much revered by ancient societies. Now, for our purposes, a totem is any natural object or animal that's believed by a group to have spiritual significance and is adopted by them as an emblem. Totems invoke the spirit of the emblem and are supposed to have the help of the supernatural, the fierce boar, the swift deer, the cunning fox, all qualities that are admired. Hence, many Scottish chiefs still display within their heraldry such totems: the Campbell boar, the Drummond hawk, the Forbes stags. Now, originally, I would suggest these would have been physical manifestations: skulls, pelts, feathers fixed to poles, and the display of that emblem on settlements or when gathering from conflict identified friend from foe. The most iconic image of this time ever seen in Scotland, albeit as an enemy, must have been the imperial eagle borne by the legions of Rome. Now, as fans of Monty Python, and for those of you who will remember the late great Romilly Squire, heraldic artist without peer, was an extra in at least 2 Monty Python films. One question that was asked was, what have the Romans ever done for us? Well, we know that aside from roads, the origins of a legal system, and probably wine, in this context, I would have to reply that they supplemented the 3-dimensional totemic image on a staff with a clearly identifiable cloth flag, the vexillum, which identified the Roman army unit by name or number, and of course from which we derive the term for the science of flags, vexillology. The common form of legionary vexillum is what we would probably now call a gonfanon, and we'll meet this a little later. Following with my hypothesis that what we recognise as clanship is rooted in antiquity, but bloomed through the assistance of Scots feudal law and the expansion of centralised royal power, it will come to no surprise to anyone that the establishment in the late 16th and 17th centuries of a fully functioning heraldic court, with much of its time and attention being occupied by clan chiefs and their rights. As the Lion Court developed and helped to expand royal, or at least centralised legal control over the use of armorial symbols of all kinds, so this regulatory regime came to determine the nature and display of such symbols, and on various forms of flag. Modern heraldic jurisprudence recognises a number of flags and banners as part of the heraldic display of those with a right to bear arms. The flags that Scots armigers or their adherents can display are partly derived from common principles emerging from military use and regulation. But other flags have become highly regulated within the heraldic system itself and can only be used if subject to an express grant from the Lord Lion. Most flags that can be grouped generically under the heading of banner can be adopted by any armiger, and all they should do is be guided by suitable experts as to what is an attractive form and what should be its substance. My only plea is that the practice of using a banner of some plain material with the owner's shield stitched in the middle should be recognised as being of dubious value. Of course, for those of you who have been to Spain, I would have to concede that the Spanish flag, with the most imposing use of the royal arms, does work, but sadly for most it does not. It's also confusing, as there are many coats of arms where an escutcheon is overlaid, usually to make some claim to other armorial rights. Now we can see this in the banner here of the Hanoverian kings of Britain, bearing the arms of the Kingdom of Hanover as an escutcheon. So bear that in mind. If you have a plain red flag with a coat of arms in the middle, it could look as if you have a shield that's gules with an escutcheon of some kind. It can be confusing. It's not a criminal offence. But the purpose of the banner is to identify the owner and is the visual equivalent of a name. Over a house, it identifies the property. Elsewhere, it indicates actual presence. The best shape for a house banner is generally square, regardless of size. Size is always, for flags, determined by the height of the building or the flagpole. Bear in mind that if you were planting a flag on the top of Mount Everest, it would have to be meters and meters and meters and meters long, and yet from below it would look like the size of the kind of flag they sell in the high street tourist shops. So it's all about proportion and perspective. However, other forms of heraldic flag require an express warrant from the Lord Lion. Here's an example of a grant of arms which describes a pennon, in this case to the Baron of Hartside. You will see that it is 4 feet long and tapered with a rounded end. Now, I'll come back to such flags presently, but the basic point is that flags like this are the subject of an express grant, and their design is regulated and cannot just be adopted by the armiger at his or her own hand. Before I turn to such specialist flags, let's look quickly at some other examples of unrestricted but interesting flags. Now, the Celts were very musical, as are the modern Scots, and it's no surprise that flags attached to musical instruments are featured in the heraldic canon. Here we have a pipe banner, much used in regimental and in civilian bands. The pipe banner is very similar in design to the street banners you will see along the Royal Mile in Edinburgh, as both are designed to hang at a roughly 45-degree angle. The design that has become favoured is very much as we see here, the arms with a fringed indented base. You will also see the practical issues that this design of flag throws up. In this example, the artist has elected to fill the space created on the right-hand side by enlarging the star. Of course, in the shield version, the stars would be symmetrical. It would be perfectly proper to leave the star symmetrical and live with a greater expanse of plain red material. That is a matter of taste. Pipe banners, unlike most flags, can also by tradition be a different design on either side. Perhaps the arms on one and the crest or some other badge on the other. In that case, remember the flag must be rendered opaque by a layer of dark fabric between the two sides. Fringes are also entirely optional and need not be metal. I have seen tartan used quite commonly. The trumpet banner, largely restricted to military or other ceremonial use, is often one of the showiest flags on display. Here we see the banner of the Royal Horse Guards around 1816, so just after the Battle of Waterloo. These are usually square or rectangular and heavily embroidered with rich material fringed and tasseled to taste. The only essential is that the charges should be in the correct orientation and face away from the trumpeter. Finally, in the generic bundle, we have the clansman's processional flag, or gonfanon. This design was approved by the late Lord Lion Innes of Edengicht in the late 20th century and was designed as a practical alternative to the practice of clansfolk processing behind swathes of tartan, usually hanging limply from a pole, rather unedifying in the main. So the practical function was to lead processions, as with church banners, and so therefore the most practical format is a gonfanon. The most convenient size is generally thought to be 36 inches square, plus, if desired, an additional tail at the base and fringing. As with street and pipe banners, the base can be flat, triangular, swallowtail, or scalloped to taste. The charge is the chiefly crest within a strap and buckle badge. Strictly speaking, the addition of the clan name is otiose, as a good clansman should know his chief's crest, but it does no harm, and in typical multi-clan parades staged during Highland Games and gatherings, this combines flag and name placard into one, and so is practical and useful. Now I wish to look more closely at three more restricted flags. Now the pencil, the guidon and the standard. The pencil we see here. We have Hunter, Nisbet, Barclay and Fraser, and this is a unique flag that can only be granted to a clan chief, and yet, strangely, it is not for their own use. The pencil, the small rectangular flag we see, is for the use of a person to whom the chief has delegated his or her personal authority for a particular reason. This is often given to an overseas clan commissioner who is hosting or attending some form of clan event or gathering. They are, according to the blazon, 4 foot 6 inches by 2 foot high, with a background of the main livery colour of the chief's arms. On it's depicted the chiefly crest within a strap and buckle, and outside the strap is a circlet with the chiefly title. On top of the circlet will be any coronet or cap of rank. In the fly is normally the plant badge with an escroll with the motto or the war cry within, this is normally called a slogan. It is worth noting that this is one of the few flags where the name of the owner may properly be emblazoned upon it. This, of course, is because the flag is given by the chief to his or her delegate, and it was clearly deemed appropriate that the true owner be correctly identified. The guidon and standard are both long, tapered flags granted only to those whom the Lord Lion accepts has sufficient status to be deemed to have kin and other adherents, generally summed up by the phrase, "are following," owing some form of allegiance or loyalty. Here are 3 images: Burnet, McKerrow and Duncan. The test today is that 2 are pennons and only 1 is a guidon. There's no money or prize for getting it right, but have a think about it, decide what you believe. The guidon is McKerrow of Hillis. Pictorially then, these flags are largely identical, but in real life, the guidon is 8 feet long, twice the length of a pennon, and generally has 5 tracts of the livery colours, in McKerrow's case gold and blue, and his has the saltire and the hoist. We'll look at hoists in more detail when we come to standards, but for now I'll merely observe it is quite common for the personal arms to be in the hoist. The crest then follows with the motto in the fly. There are no escrolls or bands to contain the motto, it just fills up the remaining space. The standard is a much more elaborate and fabulous beastie, but still similar in concept to the guidon. Standards are, however, much longer. As all here will know, the figured dimensions of any flag should be irrelevant. As I said, with my flag on the top of Mount Everest, it's proportion and perspective that matters. But not so for pennons, guidons and standards, because as we will see, only length truly identifies one from the other. Conventionally, the longest standard is that of the sovereign at 8 yards. Then in descending rank, a duke 7 yards, marquis 6.5, earls 6, viscounts 5.5, lords of parliament, in English barons 5 yards, baronets 4.5 yards, chiefs and other barons 4 yards. So here is a representation of the arms of a feudal banner and his standard. From this you'll see the basic components, a hoist. Then the remainder is divided into horizontal tracts, in this case 4, of the livery colours, with charges derived from elements of the grant of arms and the motto, or as we will sometimes see, the separate war cry, in transverse bands, dividing up the standard into compartments. In this example, the 2 bands create 3 compartments that have the crest in the middle between 2 representations of the badge. At this stage, for less expert heraldists amongst us, I would explain that a heraldic badge is an additional component in a grant of arms that an armiger may ask for, but it is not mandatory. So the badge is often some extra element taken from the arms, intentionally to be used as a real badge for, say, on livery coat buttons for the servants we all still have, of course. To illustrate, here is a version of my arms. You'll see that the dragon in my crest holds a knotted rope. You will also see 2 lotus flowers above a coronet. My badge, therefore, is composed of these 2 elements, a double or sealed rope knot surmounted by a lotus flower. And as you will see from the middle, that rather neatly becomes a silver button. Standards, as you will see, are now very elaborate. Saltire or arms in the hoists, plain or with horizontal tracts, transverse bands, compartments, crests, badges, vegetation of all kinds, mottos, round ends, split or swallowtails. And here you will see Fraser, Hay, Sinclair, and the elements, as you can see, in Fraser, quite simple, the saltire and simply the fraise, the strawberry flower, in all 3 compartments. In Sinclair, you have the saltire in the hoist, but you will see 3 different elements of the heraldry, the sergeant unicorn, the bear coming from the Earl's coronet, and a mermaid. Hay, again, differently, the first compartment is filled with the badge of not Hay as such, but Hay as the hereditary Lord High Constable of Scotland. Then the crest, and then a badge composed of the yoke, Serva Jugum, being the motto of the Hays. Forsyth simply makes repeated use of the arms in all 3 of the compartments. So an awful lot of beasties on display. Now, like the pencil, these flags do not necessarily need to donate the presence of the chief. So it flies, sometimes marking a rallying point, like a clan totem. This is where you are to gather. Or, if this seems a far cry from the simple boar skull or fox pelt fixed to a pole, or the glories of ancient Rome, the question is, how then did we get there? Sir James Balfour Paul, Lord Lion from 1890 to 1926, was of the opinion that knightly and baronial flags fell into two classes, the banner and the standard. The latter was a long, narrow flag that terminated at a pointed, rounded or swallowtail end. The standard was a working flag for the field of battle or the mock battle tournament. It was fixed immediately below the tip of the lance, very much like the simple pennon still used by lancer regiments today, although generally from a tank or armoured vehicle, as you would see in this picture. It was not until the end of the 16th century that the standard became routinely detached from the lance and was now given a pole of its own, and began the transition into a rallying point for the men-at-arms following their leader. So from a long, thin but relatively modest flag, more space tempted lords and their heralds into greater flights of fancy display. So unlike a banner, where the shape inhibited use of the full heraldic panoply of a noble family, so compromise was necessary, not so with standards. Sir James observed that the heraldic artists became quite ingenious in an effort to aggrandise and please their employers. In English flags, the hoist was generally the cross of St George. The rest of the flag was divided horizontally to provide colourful display and then scattered with heraldic badges or other charges of their arms. Slanting bands might divide up the standard to make the individual charges stand out, be more prominent, easier to see the various elements. These HQ flags became larger and larger, yard upon yard, until they approached the modern lengths I have already described. The historic evidence available to us that we can see in this slide suggests that Scottish standards had the same military and chivalric origins, but perhaps smaller and simpler. Examples we have recorded, and Sir James has this in his work, is the Cavers standard, the Keith or Earl Marshal, and the Marchment. The Douglas or Cavers standard, the origin of which is disputed, is undoubtedly very old, perhaps late 13th, early 14th century. It was of sage green silk, 12 feet long by 3 feet, tapering to the end, which may originally have been forked. It has a saltire in the hoist with hearts, followed by a lion and a tow cross surmounted of a star with the motto, Jamais arrière, never behind. This is not a lecture where we will criticise individual design, but deconstructing the mysteries of the heraldic design is important. And what we should note here is this was a battlefield flag. Long enough for display, but it was light, relatively uncomplicated, and not so long that it could not fly triumphantly from a lance or a decent pole, and moreover, be recognised. The next is an even smaller and simpler battle flag, that of Keith, the Earl Marshal. This was believed to have been carried at the disastrous Battle of Flodden in 1513. The standard was presented to the Faculty of Advocates by a descendant of the Flodden standard bearer, John Skirving, in 1808. And although carefully preserved, it is on display in the Faculty's Lord Reed building, just off the Royal Mile, and can be seen on application to the Faculty staff. The flag is a mere 4 foot 7 inches from the hoist to the upper fork end. The difference in the fork length is certainly damage, and there is also a piece of material at the hoist that is patently not original. Painted on light silk, it now presents as beige, but was probably blue. Instead of a saltire, we find 3 roebuck's head. A single roebuck head has become the modern crest of the Keiths, but again, this is not a lecture on heraldry as such, but on how it's used in flags. So this is how it was used at the time. You'll notice there's no saltire. There are no fancy compartments. The motto is strong, truth will prevail, and easy to read in any modern equivalent. Finally, in the ancient examples, we have the marchment standard. Again, the saltire is in the hoist with a single charge, a lion, and the motto, keep rule, in the fly. It is 3 feet at the hoist and just over 9 feet long. The origin of the standard is not really relevant, but it's generally accepted that it would have been flown by some border lord, and the motto reflects the role of keeping the peace in the unruly marchlands between Scotland and England. But what I would emphasise is these are all patently working flags, relatively simple and capable of being recognised by followers. But what then of the modern practice? What is the modern standard? We've seen there are all kinds of design features, hoists, tracts, transverse bands creating multiple compartments. So, can we deduce from current examples any consistent rules? As I've said, the current jurisprudence dictates that each noble rank is entitled to a standard of different lengths, from that of the Duke at 21 feet down to that of a Baron at only 12 feet. Lord Lion Balfour urged that the noble standard should display the saltire in the hoist to honour the kingdom. However, as we've seen in historical examples, for example that of Keith, personal heraldry was in the hoist. Taking a sample of 100 standards recorded for members of my former organisation, the Standing Council of Scottish Chiefs, 42 displayed the saltire in the hoist, 58 displayed the arms. So evenly balanced, but with a slight bias towards personal arms. I could offer no rational explanation, save, for example, that Lowland standards tend to favour the saltire, perhaps harking back to the battlefield use of such flags and their proximity to hostile English neighbours. Arbuthnot from Kincardine in the north bears the arms. Agnew from the borders has the saltire. Gordon from Aberdeenshire has the saltire. Ferguson from the border has the arms. So difficult to actually deduce any real principle. What of the horizontal tracts? Yes, there is a general rule for chiefs, 2, with 3 or 4 for other ranks. But the Chief of Gun has 3 horizontal tracks. There are a number of excellent examples of a single track. Macmillan with the lion's head crest. Mackenzie with the Cabas stag head. Transverse bands generally creating 3 compartments, but again, there are fine examples of a single band creating only 2 compartments. Borthwick, McNabb, Urquhart. Not the usual display of Rattray serpent, which is to slither about, where I've lost Rattray, but I'll find it. Here we are at the bottom. You'll see Rattray at the bottom. Now, there, the artist has very cleverly taken the view that they can make the standard more unique, stand out more, by taking the Rattray serpent and make it slither, not just to 1, but to 2 and 3 compartments. I don't think I know of any other example. There are cases where there are no bands of any kind. Cameron, Campbell, Boyd, Chisholm. Cameron and Campbell using plant badges as infill and also the famous Campbell salmon, which, as many of you will know, also make wonderful silver buttons worn on the evening dress of the Dukes of Argyll. Mottos versus war cries. Again, pretty evenly distributed, even though without bands creating compartments, one might suggest favouring a single word war cry filling the fly, such as Chisholm and Boyd. Cameron and Campbell have the slughorn. Say Chisholm and Boyd, the motto. Going the right way? Oh. No, I'm going the wrong way. I beg your pardon. Not very good at this. One I would point out as being of particular attention is Maclaren, where the Lord Lion of the time has decided to hedge his bets and has given him both the saltire and the arms in the hoist. But again, you can see the use of the standard available space to have the crest and the motto as large as can be in that space. There are baronet's badges. Are they relevant? Grant, Fergus and Cahoon have the baronet's badge, which is of course an augmentation to the shield. What does that tell you? Is it the rallying flag of the chief of the clan? Because the chief of the clan may no longer be a baronet. As you will know, Elliot, Margaret Elliot of Redhugh's a good example. Her father's baronetcy went to a distant cousin in Australia, but she, of course, still inherited the chiefship. So in a rallying flag, is it good practice to put in augmentations which might fly off in different generations? So, bluntly, there are no rules. And I would suggest this has led to a situation where suitable paper heraldry, where standards can adorn clan magazines and the like, have really ceased to be practical flags. And the primary problem is length. You will see my standard, a mere 12 feet long. And as you can see from this slide, even on a decent flagpole with a favourable breeze, it's struggling to fly. The only truly discernible element is the saltire in the hoist, which was handy because this was being flown in South Carolina and at least people knew I was Scottish. The fact I wasn't buying anybody a drink might have given them a hint as well, but there we are. So to conclude, let's get back to basics. Look at the historical evidence of the Cavers, Keith and Marchmont standard. Abandon lengths determined by rank. It's the proportions that matter, and it should be to a scale that can fly and be recognised in individual circumstances. The most likely way with modern standards to discern that of a duke from we lesser mortals is how far it hangs down the flagpole, not flying in the air. The saltire in the hoist, I think, demonstrates Scotland, although I accept that personal arms perhaps are more relevant to some families. Get rid of the tracts and transverse bands. One charge, preferably the crest. It's a rallying flag. So if there's a war cry rather than phrases in Latin, use it. Baronet's badges of limited advantage. So to sum up, where is it gone? Oh, yes. To sum up then, the Chief Herald of Canada, in my view, put this extremely well. A wise nation encourages the development of symbols of sovereignty, community, family life, and individual achievement. And over time, these devices become an important element in bringing a nation together through recognition of shared heritage, through colour and meaning added to public celebration, the decoration of our public buildings, the acknowledgement of contributions made by individuals and groups to the nation's story. Art and literature. And I could sum all of that up, ladies and gentlemen, by suggesting, let's have more fun with flags. Thank you very much indeed.
Right.
How do I get this to go away now?
You have a red button at the top of your screen, George. Stop sharing.
How about that?
That's the
stop
fella.
sharing. That's it. Are we back to normal?
We are, George, and thank you very much for that. And in fact, it was fascinating, as I knew it would be, and of course has made me think about the way forward in terms of what you're suggesting. It certainly would make my life a lot easier to go to the principles that you worked under. But I think it's really important that we can actually just say thank you to you, George. And I don't know how we do that online, but I'm going to clap if no one else is going to clap. Well done again. Now, let's see if we can get some questions. We've got about 10 minutes if we keep to the hour. Some questions, either put your hand up and we'll let you in, or we'll have a look on the chat.
Yes, I was warned within an inch of my life, Joe, to keep it to 45 minutes.
I thought you were wonderful. Wonderful keeping it to 45 minutes. Any questions, anybody? Hopefully, let me see. And I need to go to the people to see if anybody's got their hand up.
Not necessarily the kind of lecture that encourages a lot of questions.
Well, I think there is because for me it was the question about the kind of, if you like, the fearalism of some of the kind of clan flags and how they may need a bit of sort of redirection into a kind of standard form to meet the conditions that actually a modern society has. But so I have to think that through. So I don't have a question around it. But anybody got a question or a comment?
Having said that, Joe, sorry, Kevin. I was going to say about Kevin though. Of course, so much has changed in flag design, partly because of manufacture and design, the digital era, the use of printing onto modern fabrics. I mean, the very first standard I ever saw was embroidered applique. And even were it 3 feet long, it couldn't have flown in a force 10 gale. Yeah. It weighed a ton. So to some extent, one has to be realistic. Lots of ideas developed, rather like the, heavily embroidered trumpet flags. I mean, they're part of that great sumptuous display. Now, as Kevin has demonstrated, and I've seen, Ross wandering about with some fairly impressive things over his head, flying in quite light wind. And I think that's what's not been taken into account, is that the changes in manufacture and where you're going to display these things.
Yeah. And of course, there was a kind of period where they weren't fashionable to carry standards and flags and things, but it's all coming back again. I've now because George gave me a banner. I've now actually brought it back into some of the ceremonial for the Court of the Lord Lion, but it was because we had it and I won't use. Anyway, Kevin, you were going to come in with a question.
Thank you. Yes, it might be a question more for Robert Harrison, who I see also on the call. I had a client this week looking for a Vimple to fly in Scotland as opposed to a pennon. What's your consideration for the use of a Vimple in Scotland? And if that's not a term familiar with you, it's a Nordic term, and thus Robert Harrison might be a bit more appropriate for it.
I thought a Vimple was something. Sorry, I thought a Vimple was something that a nun wore.
I think I'll step down with my question in that case, because my client's definitely not going to be happy.
Well, what
with
does it look like?
Pretty much a pennon, but triangular, long, thin, and triangular in shape. The question is whether, and very pertinent to what you were discussing today, whether it has a crest or the arms in hoist. But obviously that it's news to you, and therefore I shall have to speak to Robert Harrison offline later on for how Nordic heraldry comes in flying heraldry to Scotland.
But no, I mean, subject to what his lordship has to say on the matter. I mean, like all of these things, I certainly wouldn't be opposed to innovation. If there's another way of displaying it in a different format, why should that be?
That was certainly my
in
feeling.
Spain, I've seen displayed on the wall, inside armories, pennons, or what I would call pennons, that are irregular triangles, and made almost of not material. They almost look as if they're made of metal, and they're stiff as a board, and presumably intended so that they could be held upright. And rather like some parade flags I've seen, the late Paddy Barden used to make a version where you could slide a metal pole into the whatever you call it at the top. He created a little sleeve. You could slide it in and then twist it, and it would lock into the pole and stop the flag from moving at all. It just would then be in display. So there's been lots of ideas like that in the past, Kevin.
I think flying colours offer a solution for flags using such a horizontal band.
Stanley, you were made a point. Do you want to make it orally?
Yes, it was just to say that on our holiday to Denmark and Iceland last year, it was noticeable that outside almost every house there was a flagpole, and flying from the flagpole was the Wimpel, a long triangular version of the national arms, with Denmark, with the Dannebrog, with the red and the white cross, and obviously in Iceland as well. And we saw it in Norway too, and it looked brilliant.
Yeah.
Sales pitch noted.
Yeah, Stanley, I agree with you. Actually, in Scandinavia, the flying of provincial streamers is very, very common, particularly in Finland, Sweden, and Norway, and also in Denmark. It's something I would certainly encourage, certainly in this country, but we don't seem to have that tradition, unfortunately.
So, Robert, in my vision then, now you've used the magic word streamer, is it more akin to a naval streamer that would be flown at the topmast of a naval ship to represent, the admiral on board?
Yes, very similar. Very similar to that.
So basically, the fact long and not tapering too much, and then tapering at the end. Would that be roughly?
Oh, they are quite long, actually, even
yes,
on
a
domestic property.
naval streamer can be because it has to be seen.
Yes,
it's quite narrow. It's only about a foot.
George, Kevin's put an example
on domestic properties, they usually are a good 3 or 4, 5 meters long.
Right.
And by about probably about half a meter in depth. But they are a party field, much like the standard as we know it here in England, but a lot longer, with the arms of the province or the municipality, followed by party colours.
You'll see an example that Kevin's put up with the Union Jack on it on the chat if you want to. Thank you, Robert. Russell, you've got a question.
Yeah, George, thank you very much for that. What you seem to have made absolutely plain is when it comes to standards, length is important, but it's most likely to be measured hanging rather than, as it were, out. What I wondered was, historically, because they do seem to be entirely impractical. I mean, I thought actually Euro and Standard seemed to give a very good account of itself. But I wondered if historically, were they actually used in other ways? Were they displayed in buildings, in rooms, in a form where they could be laid out and actually seen? Or were they actually used as flags flying? Because it does seem most of the time, as you say, even with a good wind, and particularly the higher up the ranks you get, the chances of people being able to make out rather anything other than what's in the hoist just seem unlikely.
Well, am I allowed to speak heresy?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Go.
I shall speak heresy. All of
you might get burnt at the stake.
These lengths are largely a creation of the latter part of the 20th century and part of a movement that suggested that noble ranks had to be acknowledged. There's no real evidence for that. It may well be that as a matter of practical display. Some standards were longer than others, but the rigidity of it is a post-Second World War invention. And that's why I say very much a question of paper heraldry. At that time, the making of them was kind of irrelevant. It was much more for display in other more plastic manner. And as I say, I don't personally, I'm open to be debated with by anyone, but I do not personally believe that the rigid hierarchy was anything other than, as I say, a post-war attempt to create a hierarchy of display that didn't exist in the past.
Yeah. Okay.
And in fact, from my point of view, as everyone knows, I don't think it exists today. That whole thing has sort of gone to a side issue, and it's about how do we preserve all of those ranks, value them as our heritage, but not put them into a hierarchy where I think they get lost. Now I've got William Shaw. Would you like to come and tell us what you've got to say?
Yes, good evening, gentlemen. I have always had a great love of Scots heraldry, and more recently flags and banners and the like. And my wife and I were in Siena and Assisi last October, and I was gently scolded by my bride because I wasn't taking pictures of all the amazing architecture and the history and the wonderful things in those two cities. I was taking pictures of all the flags of the Contrada. They are awesome, they are colorful, they are inspiring, and they tell a story. And most importantly, they unite a community. And plus, if you had a keen eye, each Contrada's heraldry was tucked away in little spots in all the buildings. So my phone is absolutely bulging with pictures of flags. And when I had some time, I was going to post a little bit of an overview on it at the Heraldry Society site. But it was very inspiring. It was very wonderful, and I'd love to see that echoed in Scotland as well, which I hope it is, and it can be.
Right, thank you.
Well, I think, Lord Lyon, that's really at the root of your community flag movement.
Flag thing, yeah.
Where at the end of the day, because a lot of the Confrada flags wouldn't meet some of the picky people on the screens here. Views on adequate blazon, and there's colours on colours and metals on metals. But the whole point is it's recognised by the community as their flag, and their riders make their silks out of the same design as the Confrada. And on it, I do really think that that's a great movement to bind communities together by flags that are sort of heraldic, but without getting one's underwear in a twist about the kind of hierarchical so-called rules that we see here. It's just something that everybody recognizes and says, there we are, that's our image. So I think we're heading that way anyway, aren't we, Lyon?
Yeah, I think so. One last question, and that takes us to 8 o'clock, or I'll wind up if there isn't any other question. Anybody else? I'll need to find out where the people have gone now. There are people. Anybody got their hand up?
Probably to the pub, Lyon.
No, they haven't. I think they've all enjoyed it, George. So, right. According to me, that's 7:59, and I think you've all been wonderful at staying on for the hour, and you'll either have had your meal or are ready to have your meal. But I want to say thank you to George. There's lots of things to take away and to think about from his talk. One is that I can still remember in my early days when designing a blazon for a standard was taken to task that wasn't the way it was done, but it appears there is no way it's to be done, and I think that's what I learned as we went through the first 3 or 4 years as Lord Lyon. But there were people who were determined it was done that way and no way at all, and lots of it was about length, but lots of it was about the design. And I think that William Shaw, is it Bill or William? I can't remember. He's gone.
It's fine.
Bill, is it, or William?
It's Bill.
Bill. That what Bill was saying is actually very important, that it actually engages the communities and the people with our heraldry and with what we might see as significant ways of establishing identity. So thank you, George. Rothsay Herald, for a wonderful talk, and also for one that was about practice rather than about theory, which I think is very important indeed, and it will have given us a lot to go away and think about. And if I can find the capacity to actually find time to do it, I might write a few rules about standards and flags and get them adopted for the next generation, which might be something before I retire as Lord Lyon that I'll do. But there's lots of stuff going on at the moment that doesn't make that possible. Well done to everybody. We haven't got the next talk quite lined up, but we're hoping, and I'm just give you a little taster for this, that Sir Jeff Palmer, who's a Knight of the Thistle, will do his personal presentation on called A Knight's Tale. So that should be fascinating, from Jamaica to the Order of the Thistle in terms of his journey. But I think it'll be quite a colourful and a kind of personally moving. But we'll get information out to you as soon as we can. Not to go into a debate, but we are still struggling with getting the right kind of model for the digitization, but we're moving through. Every time we think we're going there, somebody says it's not future-proofed, and we're about 10 years behind. So we've got a bit of work to do with actually getting that done. But there's some other interesting stuff going up on the website for viewing at the moment. So keep in touch with us, and we appreciate greatly your help. And I'm looking forward to actually meeting you. That this year will be a year that we'll put a bid in for a reception with the Princess Royal, our patron, and that'll get a chance to invite you all to come together, because it's very much an online organisation. So we'll get you all to come together for that. To George, a big thank you from a very busy man who would be very busy doing a lot of things to keep us all safe in terms of the criminal work and on the right line with regard to his civil work. So thank you, George. And thank you, everybody, for attending. Look after yourself and take care. Look after yourself and take care.
Thank you, George.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, George. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.